Hi, and thanks for joining us for this session on the path to innovation. My name's Francis Vigent. I'm CEO here at KnowAtom. We're located just north of Boston in Salem, Massachusetts, and we're interested in the path to innovation because we're not only equipping classrooms to teach science and engineering and engage students' higher order thinking through creative, evaluative, and analytical skills, those critical thinking skills that we're all focused on, but really we're hoping that as a result of classroom instruction, we are preparing children to participate in innovation, whether that means they're scientists and engineers or salespeople or informed consumers. So as we talk today with Dr. Erika Ebbel Angle, we're going to be discovering her story about what led her to become not only a scientist and an engineer, but an entrepreneur pursuing what she learned in school to an actual career. So to give you a little bit of background on Erika, she is CEO and co-founder of Axela. Erika Ebbel Angle received her PhD in biochemistry in 2012 from Boston University's School of Medicine. She holds a BS from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and in 2002, Erika founded Science from Scientists, an award-winning national nonprofit focused on improving science, technology, engineering, and math, which we often call STEM, attitudes and aptitudes for children aged 9 through 13. She currently serves on the Massachusetts STEM Council Legislator Education Work Group and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education STEM Advisory Council here in Massachusetts. She is also a member of the Board of Trustees and the Executive Committee at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. In 2014, the Boston Business Journal selected her as one of the 40 under 40 business and civic leaders who are making a major impact in their respective fields in the greater Boston area. And her accomplishments have also been recognized by the Boston Chamber of Commerce's Pinnacle Award for Emerging Executives in 2015, and in 2013, the Boston Chamber of Commerce selected her as one of the 10 outstanding young leaders in Boston. 2007, she was identified as L'Oreal Paris's Woman of Worth for her work with Science from Scientists, and she's been featured on Lifetime TV and Nova Science Now on the Secret Lives of Scientist and Engineer. Erika served as commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women, and in 2004 was Miss Massachusetts in the Miss America Scholarship Program. So thank you very much for joining us, Erika. I appreciate the time and your willingness to share about your path to innovation with us.
Thank you, Francis, for having me.
So jumping in here, and I'll just let everybody know who's on the live session just as we get going. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. We're going to do our best to save some time for that. You'll see on your screen that there's if you're in the live session, a dialog box where you can enter questions, and we'll do our best to bring those up at the end if they aren't answered sometime in the course of conversation. We also have a bit of a thunder and lightning event right now where we're located, so if for some reason we lose connection, please dial back in, and if for some reason that gap exceeds 15 minutes, we'll have to reschedule. So with that said, Erika, you're co-founder of the healthcare biotech company Axela, and Axela's focus on this idea of internal fitness. Can you tell us a bit about what Axela does and what this idea of internal fitness is? Why is it so important?
Sure. So I'll start by just describing internal fitness, and then I'll tell a little bit more about what Axela's business model actually is. So people they're complex systems. And we believe that optimal health is the result of having a healthy gut microbiome. So this company is very much centered around the theme of gut microbiome health. I can describe what that means for those people who aren't aware. But that when you have the correct balance of biochemistry and microbes in your body, then you are, by definition, a term that we coined, internally fit. So the gut microbiome is a very complex system. Basically, these are all the different bacteria, yeasts, things that live in your small intestine. And recent studies have shown that if you have problems with your gut microbiome, you are susceptible to a variety of other potentially deleterious other diseases down the road. So whether they be in the neurodegenerative disease family, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, etc., things like, for example, autoimmune conditions, things like leaky gut, even conditions that are as simple as acid reflux. So the gut microbiome plays a very, very important role in overall health, and thus, when we coined this term internal fitness, we thought it was apropos, because if you have poor gut microbiome health, then you're probably not particularly internally fit. So the purpose of Axela is to we've designed a program where you take a pinprick blood sample, and you poke your finger. It's a test kit that we send you. Poke your finger. You take about 20 to 30 microliters of blood in a capillary, and you put it on a little test kit, and you send it in to us, and then we send back a report looking at 12 different small molecules that both we and others have shown to be important to gut microbiome health. And so you get back your report, and then we try to assist with creating a personalized program to help restore, should you have some sort of imbalance, to restore this gut microbiome health in a regimen of lifestyle changes, different supplementation, etc. So we try to assist once we know if there's a specific imbalance, with whatever problem there might be. My co-founder was actually a gentleman that I had done my PhD with, and he's in his early 70s and has a pretty extensive track record in the area of metabolomics and small molecule research in this specific field. And so, when we decided to found Axela, we said, hey, it'd be great to create a product that can actually help people to find out if their gut microbiome is healthy, and then make alterations as needed to improve their internal fitness.
So basically, when people have an issue with internal fitness, is that lifestyle choices? Is it genetics, or some combination of both?
It's definitely a combination of both, and to some extent, yes, in genetics there are some aspects of genetics which are inalterable, but there are also things that you can change that will alter alter specific elements of the genetics, so that you're not necessarily absolutely certain to get a specific condition. And so, in the area of metabolomics is very much like a snapshot of the current biochemical profile of your body. Whereas genetics, when you think about it, genetics are sort of further upstream. Some of them are, you're stuck with what you've got, but otherwise, some of the metabolites and metabolomics can actually affect the genetics for specific outcomes and diseases. So one of the reasons why this is actionable is because metabolome shows the exact snapshot at that second of what is going on in your body, and these things are changeable, fixable in the immediate case.
So the term that you use, and I may mispronounce this, metabolomics, so that is metabolized, or just for folks who may not be familiar with this term. So it's basically molecules that are metabolized, or part of the digestive sort of deconstruction of molecules. So for instance, food or waste products in the body, is that correct?
Sure. So metabolomics is the study of metabolites. So there are thousands of different metabolites, anything that is basically digested and processed through the body. So it can be amino acids, could be metabolites, tyrosine, tryptophan, and then you have other types of compounds as well that are in those. For example, we're specifically interested in compounds that are in the tryptophan pathway. And so, if you were so inclined, you could do a Google search and say, all right, what are the different metabolites as your body breaks down tryptophan? What happens to it? And there are a whole variety of different intermediate compounds, all of which are individual metabolites. So, we're testing, at least for this test, only 12 metabolites, but just for those who have never heard of the term, your body has tens of thousands, probably more, different types of metabolites currently floating around in your various systems.
Interesting. So basically, how well your body's breaking those down, or perhaps whether they are or are not breaking down certain materials is essentially a sign or perhaps a precursor to other conditions, and or perhaps create the conditions for something to become more imbalanced. So I think about a gut microbiome. It's kind of an ecosystem, essentially, is what you're talking about.
That's right. So some of the bugs that live, bugs, I call them bugs, but they're bacteria that live in the small intestine, actually will secrete or spit out some of these metabolites into the bloodstream. Some of the compounds that we're interested in are antioxidants, so they are known to be protective. And for example, if you have in your your youth or even recently taken a lot of antibiotics or eaten lots of processed foods, or there are a whole variety of different ways to insult your gut microbiome. Stress is a huge factor. Then it's possible that you might have wiped out certain families of these bacteria that in the case of some of them, right, they're secreting positive, good compounds into the bloodstream, and as a result, you are at a disadvantage because now your body is exposed. You no longer have those compounds present to help fight off or prevent these diseases from occurring, or the disease processes from occurring. So part of it is to identify the specific weaknesses or challenges, and then help to restore the balance that you might not have currently.
That sounds really interesting. I know I recently did a blood test myself for Axela, so I'm looking forward to seeing the results and learning more about my internal fitness. I wonder, as you look back, today you have a PhD in biochemistry, you have multiple patents and trademarks and everything that's coming together in this particular venture, and I'm sure others. When you think back, given that most of the people we are listening to this discussion are K-12 educators, whether they are teachers or principals or so on, what people or experiences nudged your curiosity from those early days towards some kind of STEM career that has resulted in all of these really interesting technologies?
Absolutely. It all started in the 6th grade, and interestingly enough, it was my 6th grade English teacher who got me interested. At the time, there was a class trip to Washington, D.C., and my parents had said to me, look, you have a choice. You can either send you to Washington with your class, or we can go to Cancun during spring break. We can't afford to send you to both, but you can pick. So, obviously, an 11-year-old kid, right? So I picked Cancun. For those of us who didn't go to Washington, D.C., we weren't allowed to just stay home and play hooky. We actually had to go to school, and the teacher who stayed back with us was, in fact, my 6th grade English teacher. And she had us reading books like Jurassic Park and Andromeda Strain, and doing very simple science experiments. And I loved it. I loved the books. I loved the experiments. And then then April came, and family, we went to Cancun, and we visited a crocodile farm. And crocodiles, when they're mortally wounded, will actually flip over on their backs and slip into a coma and commit suicide. And so, if you ever find yourself wrestling a crocodile, just flip it over on its back long enough, and it will die. And so when I got back from that trip, they said, well, guess what? Science fair project time. And of course, all kids would say, well, what am I going to do for my science fair project? And I think with all of the reading of all these different books and this experience, the crocodile farm, I said, gee, I'd really like to do a science fair project where I look to see if cells commit suicide if they're infected by viruses. And don't ask me how that happened. That just was my hypothesis. And so I told my teacher, I was like, this is going to be my project. And she looked at me and said, okay, you're probably not going to be able to do that here, but, we encourage you to go and maybe find someone who can help you to do it. So I made a variety of different phone calls. I pulled out, at the time, it's the Yellow Pages, right? I pulled out the Yellow Pages and was looking to see what local area labs were close to where we lived, and I made dozens of phone calls, and most of the people who I called, of course, when you say you're an 11-year-old who's looking for a mentor to do a science fair project, most of the different companies were very concerned. In fact, they wanted to talk to my parents because they thought that I was crazy, and said, look, you should probably be keeping track of what your daughter is doing in the basement without you knowing about it. And so, I struck out until there was one gentleman who worked at a local public health lab who said, look, come on in and talk to me about it. And I walked in and he said, well, what do you know about virology? Nothing. What do you know about cell biology? Nothing. And so he gave me this stack of, textbooks like molecular biology of the gene, and he said, you can read all of this, and I'm here every day after 4:30. I will work with you. I will help you, but he let it be on me. And suffice to say, make a long story short, I designed a little experiment with him to test whether viruses, cause cell death, and the results were inconclusive because it was a very basic experiment, but it was my first time working in the lab, and I loved it. And then the following year, I ended up coming back to that lab and starting a project, which then I worked on through high school. And so that was, 6 years of working in that lab, and it was just so incredibly important. So, Michael, the gentleman at the public health lab, and Anne, the English teacher.
That's interesting. At least for myself, I know that, and I found when I think about critical thinking and I think about sort of the creative, evaluative, and analytical thinking skills that are required to be a scientist or an engineer, I often associate those, even in my experience, with my English teachers in middle school and in high school. And in talking to other innovators, I know Louis Athanas, who invented audio glass, a number of other audio products, shared that his sort of leading to engineering, audio engineering, was through his English teacher as well. And I wonder, kind of jumping around here a little bit, but why? Well, maybe first of all, is what does it really mean to be a good scientist or engineer? Is there some connection to the arts a little bit?
It's a great question, and I think one of the reasons why Michael was such a great teacher was because he never, even though he knew things weren't going to work out, he never told me, right? So he never squashed any of the creative ideas that I had. He never, poo-pooed it or said, well, I already know that's not going to work, or that's a bad idea, or whatever. He let me figure it all out by myself and encouraged it. You want to try it? Try it. And, why do you think that's the case? And, he made me describe why I wanted to set up experiments a certain way. He made me really think it through. And, I think one of the things, the easiest way to, make someone feel like they're not good enough or not smart enough is just to say, well, we know that's not going to work. But you're 11, you're 12, you're young, you're a kid. You don't know that it's going to work or not, and so you want to be encouraged, and then you learn. Oh, okay, yeah, that didn't work. So here's what I would do to change that experiment. And I think these are the skills that define what it means to be a scientist. So when you say research, there's a reason why it's research, R-E. Search, because you have to do it more than once. It doesn't work out the first time. Maybe it will. Maybe you're super lucky and it does, but rarely, right? So you learn the skills of perseverance. You don't take it personally if it doesn't work out. It's a learning experience. You adapt. You improve the design. You improve the experiment. You fix things as you go. And there's really, you learn very early on that there is no stupid question. You want to be curious. You want to be able to ask people things and learn and experiment and try things. And so I think that's what makes true mentors really exceptional. They're able to guide you to learn these different things, even if they know that what you're doing isn't going to work, but they know how to inspire you, they know how to help you build confidence, and they know how to help you to think the right way. So ultimately, science is not just memorizing facts. right? Now we live in a society where you can look anything up online, but how do you use that information in a way that is productive, that builds something? Those are the critical thinking skills that everyone is talking about.
It seems like and this is something we talk about often, especially with the next generation science standards, is that there's a big shift right now, and you're from Massachusetts, KnowAtom's located in Massachusetts, but next generation science standards, we interact with these pretty much everywhere else, and even a little bit here in Mass. The shift under the new standards, as we often talk about it, is really a shift from a traditional model of instruction and perhaps even reasoning for teaching science to something that's next generation. And the way we kind of look at that often is to say that the traditional model of defining or even teaching science is this idea that there are facts that you need to know, and those facts get somehow projected to children, and children need to absorb those and be able to project them back. And that's where that kind of fill-in-the-blank model of assessment and whatever we want to call it, definition of proficiency kind of originates. And then under these next generation science standards, or at least the way that the National Research Council has talked a lot about what the next generation science standards should represent with science and engineering practices, is the idea that the content is not sufficient, but I think along the lines of what you're describing, it's about the ability to develop and use content, to actually go beyond that, to think about it. And so, I guess, it sounds like what you're describing is that as educators, it's not just the facts but that we need to be focused on, but really how we question and challenge students to think in the classroom, and to create, evaluate, and analyze scientifically. I mean, is that an accurate sort of portrayal?
I think absolutely. I think that there's just a challenge for most educators today. There's just so much. There's not enough time. There's not always a lot of time, especially for STEM, with all of the emphasis in other subject areas. It's just educators up against a lot of hardship, and so it's difficult to, in addition to teaching the content, because you still do have to teach something, right, content-wise, to then also have the time to even go beyond and to do these additional pieces that you're talking about, Francis. So, part of what I think the purpose of the next gen standards are to integrate all of this together. Again, whether or not that ends up being feasible with the time, resources, et cetera, that folks have, that remains to be seen. But I absolutely agree with you.
So kind of building on that, I guess I kind of see the switch, or the purpose of science in the classroom, changing. And I guess I see it as changing from learning about what scientists and engineers have done to learning to be a scientist or engineer. And I'm not sure. We'll see how that flushes out. But I guess one of the questions I really want to ask is that, as a scientist and entrepreneur, as an engineer, really, how do you define innovation? Because it seems like if we're going to teach children to be scientists and engineers, it has something to do with innovation. So, what is innovation to you?
Sure. So, well, first of all, let me just say that my trajectory, I never really thought about becoming an entrepreneur and innovator. And part of this is because this is not taught. Even in college, at MIT, the reason why I went and started Science from Scientists is because I saw others starting businesses. And I think I was very fortunate that I had these sort of real-life role models doing it. But it's just not something that one considers, simply because it's not like you take a class on entrepreneurship. It's just, and maybe I think it's happening more now than it used to, but it's definitely still, when you go and you give talks at the college level, and I've given talks at MIT and even at BU Med, it's just not something that folks consider as a viable career opportunity. It's not as well known as I think it would be. It would be nice for it to be more well known, but it's not. And so, with regards to innovation, it's a difficult question. I think it's doing something unique, doing something new, and doing something cutting edge. But you know, it can be defined very much by the individual. I mean, there's so many options. I mean, if you have a STEM degree, you can choose to start a business that is in STEM. I mean, in my case, I was in the life sciences, so it was biotech. But you can also start businesses in bioinformatics and in topics that bridge the gap between different fields. That's something that's happening more and more. Before, if you had a degree in biology, there were jobs. Now you almost have to branch out and have additional skill sets, or you have bioinformatics or biostatistics, and so I think you have to kind of push the envelope a little bit and spread your wings and be more cross-disciplinary, comfortable, if that makes any sense. But I
Sure.
do think that it's to me, innovation is defined by something new, something exciting, something useful, but it can be socially useful. I mean, I think that if starting a nonprofit to help people is innovative. I mean, starting a biotech to help people is innovative. I mean, I think it's such a broad. It's a tough question because I think it's a very broad answer, and I think it depends on finding that which is right for you as that innovator, and as long as you're passionate about it and feel like there's a place for it and that it's useful, then you've checked the boxes.
Would it be fair, do you think, to define innovation as extending something, basically from what's known to what's unknown, in a sense?
Of course, right? I mean, I think innovation suggests new, so it can be an extension as long as it's something that's novel, right?
Sure. So when you think about something like Axela, this biotech that you've started, and is there a connection there in terms of the innovation? Did you see a space where you said, here's something on the left and here's something on the right, but there's nothing in between that Axela can fill this gap with testing for internal fitness and trying to resolve it?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of different levels for Axela. One, the gut microbiome space has become, though it's still quite new, it's become something that you see more and more businesses being started up, in the gut microbiome space. We're also interested in preventive medicine, and so part of the sort of thematic concept behind Axela is, if you can, earlier on in people's lives, correct the things that could potentially down the road lead to worse things, then you've done a service by helping them to live and lead healthier lives. And so the gut microbiome is the specific, I'd say organ, but the specific practical, the location where we're doing this, right? But the concept is, how do we identify the problems before they become a real big problem? And that is what I think makes Axela, at the 20,000-foot level, unique, right? So let's fix the problem before it happens. And then, in doing so, you think about how much money is spent on healthcare and treating, folks with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all these debilitating diseases. Thus, if you can prevent these things from happening, you can really impact change, because you're lowering the cost of healthcare, you're improving the healthcare system, you're empowering people to go and make more informed decisions about their own healthcare with their own physicians. You're giving them information that they can then use to live better lives. So that would be, I think in Axela's case, that's one of the unique aspects. And then, of course, when you start looking at the technology and the way that we analyze the samples and the specific compounds, there's uniqueness there as well. So, why are these the compounds? How do we collect the samples? How do we process them? There's innovation there as well. But I think, if I had to tell you why Axela is unique, it is, one, it is a personalized way of telling folks, hey, look, something in the body may not be where you want it to be. let's try to fix it. Here's how. And then, so it's all actionable, which I think is very, very important. And, let's try to keep you healthy enough so that you're minimizing your chances of having bad things go wrong down the road. And then in general, as this company is dealing primarily in the supplement space, our goal is to, we're not diagnosing diseases, we're not treating diseases. I'm going to be very clear about that. That is not the goal. We can tell you about the health of the gut microbiome, but this is not a diagnostic per se company or a drug company, a therapeutic company. We're trying to also help inform people about the specific types of supplements that they need. You go to Whole Foods and you decide, well, maybe I need to take vitamin B6, or maybe I need to take vitamin D, and you just take it sort of blindly. My theory on this is you want to treat every supplement like it's a drug. And so if you can inform people about whether they need specific types of interventions, then you are preventing them from taking supplements that they might not actually need. So it's, we call it informed science, the science of supplements, but science of supplementation, rather than just blindly, dosing yourself. We give you the information to know whether or not you even need it.
That's really interesting. So you saw a gap between folks who, well, not only are looking for information about their health, but on top of it, who are looking to improve their health through different supplements, but who were basically kind of doing so blindly. And this really fits that gap of providing the information so that instead of taking a supplement that you may not need and perhaps not knowing about one that you do, or the effects of taking one or the other or a combination of things, this really kind of closes the loop, I guess, not to sound too kitschy, but closes the loop on that.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly right. And so I think those are the unique sides of the innovative, really the 20,000-foot innovation at Axela.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about your experience in K12, so in 6th grade, you go to the alligator farm, you get your kind of curiosity piqued, you come up with this science fair idea, you have a teacher who's letting you experiment, encouraging you to experiment, and you go on to do the science fair project and actually convince somebody to mentor you and maybe use their lab too, and so on. I guess, there's like a combination of sort of grit and skills and knowledge that kind of all come together here. Do you see that as something that, everyday K-12 teachers can do, whether it sounds like, you had an English teacher that engaged you. It sounds like that's probably possible still today for English teachers and others. Do you see, would you encourage that, one, and two, do you see a connection between these kind of skills and innovation with employment prospects for students in terms of actually getting them ready for, college if that's what they choose, or, a trade or some combination?
Sure. I think the answer is yes, of course, right? I think we can all help kids by teaching them the importance. I think perseverance, it's something that comes up all the time in discussions, but I can't sort of emphasize the importance of being able to fail and try again. One of the things I see now with many of the kids that we work with is they try once, and it's like, oh, it didn't work. Okay, I guess I'm not going to do it. Or, oh, I must be bad at it. Or, oh, it's hard, right? So those are the three things that you hear, and it's, how do you train the kids to embrace what's hard, to really, to do something, to achieve something, and then feel the pride that you feel after you've done something that's really hard? And how do you celebrate that? And I think, we've kind of come to this point where, everyone's a winner, and even companies are now taking on this tactic where, they're promoting employees every 3 to 6 months with, they call it the merit badge approach, where they've created, 6 additional awards that you can win just so that you feel like, they're like hollow awards, but just so you can feel like you're winning something. And it's sad, but I think we as a nation, but I think whether you're a teacher or a parent, how do you really teach your kid to, okay, it didn't work the first time. It's not a big deal. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means nothing, really. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Because, in real life, nothing works out the first time. I mean, it doesn't. And I was trained to the point where I just never assumed it would work out the first time. It was, my parents never made a big deal out of it. Oh, it didn't work out. Okay, whatever, let's do it again. And, and you learn very quickly that, okay, I make my first call and it didn't work out and somebody doesn't want to help me, but there's 30 other people on the list. And it may be number 29 or 30 that says yes, but someone will say yes. Someone will help you. The right thing will happen if you can, wait it out long enough. Most of the entrepreneurs that I've talked to, and you listen to their stories and how long it took them to succeed, it was not the first time, the second time, the third time. Sometimes it was the 14th business model that they had. And so much of the success of, the kids today is going to be based on their ability to endure, their ability to sort of pick themselves up and just work hard and try again and again and again. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we foster that learning process and make them feel like it's okay that they need to go through this iteration. And if you're going to be smart about the way you do things, yeah, you can, as you get a little older and you can plan out your experiments or the way you're going to live your life, the decisions that you make. So I'm not suggesting that you have to fail at everything every single time. That's not the point. But I think that working hard and persevering just means there's the expectation that you can try your best, and even if it doesn't work, that's not any kind of social commentary about your skill set or your inability to do something. You just have to be able to pick up and try again.
Well, and I know as a teacher too, many of us will be familiar with the book Mindset, and I'm not sure if that's a book that you're familiar with, but it's been in the media recently around some of the maybe research techniques that were associated, but I don't think it invalidates really what the book talks about, which is about praising the effort and about really praising the engagement and not the outcome as much. Of course, the outcomes matter. Nobody go out and fail. That's not
right. No, right? You wouldn't do that. Exactly.
No, you wouldn't. And I actually, it always bothers me when people talk about embracing failure or encouraging failure, because I think it's actually it's mistaking a mistake for a failure, because I think that those are two different things. And I think what you're talking about is expect that mistakes are going to happen, but persevere so that you don't fail. You continue, and that's really where that grit and determination and that hard work really pays off. Is that
yeah,
correct?
That is right. And there's a great story. I was on a panel with Bernie Gordon, who is quite a well-known entrepreneur, and he tells this great story about the difference between failure and mistake. And he said, look, you can make mistakes till the cows come home. And if you ever have a chance, Google Bernie Gordon's speeches. He is very entertaining to listen to. But making a mistake is one thing, but failure is another. So if you're a startup entrepreneur and you miscalculate something, and you suddenly run out of money because you did your math wrong, and you ended up you only had 3 months of money left, and and you thought you had a year of money left, and now you have to shut down your business, and so that's like a failure, right? You've completely screwed it up. Hate to say that, but that's right. Whereas a mistake is on a much smaller scale, and you can learn from it, right? You can fix it. So I think absolutely you do not want to encourage everyone to just say, okay, I can make all these really big have failures all my life. But I think you encourage people to make mistakes you know, with calculated risk.
Mm-hmm. And I think as scientists or engineers that must be vital, because like you said earlier, you might get lucky and something works the first time, but that's like Powerball type luck. It's not commonplace for scientists and engineers. And the mental picture I got when you were describing that is, and I think too that you can almost judge a society by its photo stock when we see the kind of images when you look at photo stock for science or engineering or science science class or something like this. It's always this kind of clinical lab type environment. But I picture those early folks out researching forms of antibiotics, and they were out in fields with shovels looking for spores, and maybe you know the story better, but it's just that was the kind of grit and determination that people were out in farm fields just trying to find the spores that they thought would be necessary to fight disease.
Well, the only time that I've ever had everything work out absolutely perfectly is when I make a mistake. So we always joke in the lab that, things work out perfectly when you actually miscalculate it when it works out for you. So, my co-founder says that many of his greatest discoveries were made because he did something accidentally wrong. So, it's a kind of a running joke. But when you're actually planning it and it's all perfect, then it never works the first time. But it's
sure.
a situation in life where if it's 9 o'clock at night in the lab and you're like, oh God, this is never going to work, and who knows, you put something together and then sure enough, that's when it works. So.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as a female scientist, what do you see? I mean, there's some big key takeaways here that, as we're talking, I think, for classroom teachers. But one of the questions comes up often around, what's lacking in K12, and maybe from your experience, that would encourage more girls to pursue STEM careers the way you have?
Sure. So of what we've seen, one of the big ones was just role models. Not normally seeing female engineers or scientists and not realizing that that was something that they could be when they grow up. I am fortunate in that many of the staff that work at Science from Scientists are female, and now, of course, when they go into classrooms, many of the girls say, well, I've never seen a female scientist, and wow, you're pretty normal. You have a normal life, and you have other interests. There remains this sort of stereotyping of what it means to be a scientist, and especially to be a female scientist. And I think a lot of the girls that we work with are surprised when they can, they have the opportunity to interact with scientists who have other interests and hobbies, and have families, and have very, very quote normal lives. So I think that some of it is just exposure to role models and others who have done this before and can talk to the kids about their experiences. The other thing that we've seen happen is the peer pressure side, which is, my friends won't like me if I'm quote smart, or the boys won't like me if I'm a nerd. It's also one of the reasons why when we send our female role model scientists into the classrooms, I think it's really important for all the boys to also see that women can be in these positions, because then they're less likely to make fun of their peers and say, oh, girls can't do that. And it's they say it. I believe this 1,000% that no one says that absolutely thinking and doing it in a nasty way. But one of our good friends has a 6-year-old son, and she said one day they were driving past a baseball field and girls were playing baseball, and he said, girls don't play baseball. And she said, what do you mean, why not? And he's like, I've never seen them. And you think about it, right? It's most of Major League Baseball is played by men. That's what he's seen. That's what he's been exposed to. And so that's what he said. And he didn't mean it like, oh, girls don't have the ability to do that, but he's never been exposed. And so that was the perception that he had. So, so much of it is based on, what you've seen and the experiences that you've had. And so it's one of these things where when you try to bring the right types of role models in for both boys and girls, to learn about what it means to be a scientist or engineer of a specific type, what personality types, there are all sorts of different types of people who do this, and somehow it takes away the mystique. It makes it more approachable, and especially when those scientists say, yeah, God, I took that class, it was really hard, I had to drop it or take it again, or, it's not like that all scientists were born with perfect. It's like I took every science class and I got an A+, and that's what makes me a scientist. No, there are subjects that we're good in, there are subjects that are a little bit more challenging for us, and I think once the kids can see that, then it changes everything about the scariness of science, and it makes it much more approachable and understandable, like all other subjects.
Sure. No, it's interesting. There seems to be a common theme as we've been talking to different innovators, particularly women scientists or engineers, who talk about their experience as having that mentor, or at least the knowledge that being a scientist or engineer was not incompatible with some of their life goals as well. Particularly, I think, as people talk about in a high school and college, they will often talk about thinking, well, I want to have children, and so on and so forth. That's a priority for me. Can scientists do that? Can engineers do that? And when they would meet women who were scientists or engineers and realized that they had normal lives like everybody else, they felt that that was something that was an option for them. And the example of the 6-year-old boy saying girls don't play baseball because he hadn't actually seen that in Major League Baseball, it makes perfect sense. And it also, I wonder too if sometimes the way that science is approached, sometimes having less purpose in terms of building cars and blowing things up in physics class and crashing things, that seems to be somewhat of a turnoff at times to folks, to girls as well. Is that something that was consistent with your experience at all?
Well, it's a good question. I don't have enough. I'd say I don't have enough data to be able to tell you for certain. I think there are definitely things that you see. Girls work very differently when you observe them in teams than boys. They're different. Girls and boys are different. They just are. And people have tried all kinds of different things, right? Everything from designing chemistry classes around around the makeup of chemistry, the science of chemistry and behind makeup, or things that are more appropriate to the female quote mind. But I think that there's also a lot of controversy there, because there are folks who say, well, that shouldn't be the case, and if you're going to train your daughter from an early age to do all of these things, then why not just give her blocks like you give your son? And so it's just, you get into this area that I try very much to avoid. My philosophy on this is, whether you have a daughter or son, you do your best to expose them to as many different things as you possibly can. And whether that's Barbies and Legos or toys or G.I. Joe, whatever that is going to be, but you let them try everything, you show them everything, you bring them the blocks, you bring them the Legos, you still play dress up. At the end of the day, you give them that broad choice of different things, and then you see what ends up being of interest. But people are so very different, and you never know what's going to spark a child's mind in any given direction, right? I read books on science. That was my initial exposure, and and I love to read still, but I'm a scientist and a business person, which is completely not what I thought was going to have happen. But I think we try our best to to provide children with a wide range of different experiences and to not pass judgment on them, and then see what appeals to each individual child and see if we can foster that as they grow.
Mm-hmm. So before we open this up for questions, because I think we do have a few questions here, I wanted to ask you, I'm sure that folks are listening saying, I'm with you, you're preaching to the choir, but if you knew the folks that teach in the classroom next to me or down the hall next door, or even teach my own children, they're not into STEM. They don't see the value in STEM. They're not on the same page with us. And from those people who aren't on the same page, they might say something like, well, if today we have 4% of the kids who graduate go on to become scientists or engineers, and we could double the number of scientists and engineers to 8%. That would be more than adequate for our needs. So there are actually more sales and marketing people than there are scientists and engineers, yet we're being asked to teach 100% of the students science and engineering and not things like sales and marketing. So why should, and I guess this is the question, why should every student learn STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math in K-12 from your perspective?
Well, so there's just two reasons, more than two, but the two major overarching reasons. So one is, the skills that you are trained to have when you are learning STEM are applicable for any job that you might want in the future. So teamwork, critical thinking, observation, try and retry, perseverance, sticking to it, all experimentation, all of these things, having an open mind, creativity, whatever. These are all skills that you will need no matter what. So whether or not you become a scientist or a illustrator or whatever you're doing, these are skills that are important to have. From the more practical workforce development piece, we hear every day how there simply aren't enough scientists and engineers, that companies are struggling to find talent here at home. They have to either move their businesses overseas or bring in outsourced staff. And the sad part is that many of these jobs are high-paying jobs. And so what happens is, sort of in the long term, that if we are not competitive in STEM fields, and companies are sending all these sort of high-quality jobs elsewhere, then it really impacts, I think, the standard of living that we have here and that we're used to having here, and especially if the companies are sending the highest-paid jobs elsewhere. So I think from one perspective, it's, look, the skills that you learn, in studying STEM are applicable to any field and are important to have. And then there's this aspect of, we really don't want to be sending many of our highest paying jobs elsewhere, because I think that's just, it's bad for the country as a whole.
Sure. Well, and I think that idea too, that if you are in sales or you are in marketing or you're, frankly designing buildings or, building buildings, having an appreciation and knowledge of science and the scientific thinking skills really equips you to be able to support those industries as well as they grow and as our economy shifts. So that's really interesting. So we have a number of different questions here. I'm trying to consolidate these into a few.
Sure.
And a number of thank yous. So one, I think this one maybe puts it all together in one. So thank you, Erika, for being a great role model for women in science. And another here asking, is there a connection between Axela and robotics? And we didn't actually mention that your husband is the CEO of iRobot, so I suppose there's at least some connection here. But could there be if there isn't, in terms of technology that you're building and robotics, whether in some form?
Sure. So so currently no. iRobot, it's interesting, because of my connection to Colin, the easier quote connection would be on the STEM side. because iRobot has a STEM initiative where they, a lot of their employees go and volunteer in classrooms, and they do robotics demos. They have Create, which is a sort of an older version of Roomba that's programmable that kids can access for high school with their teachers. But because of the nature, it's my husband, so there is very strict rules about how much the two companies sort of financially can work together. We don't. There's no money that ever is transacted between iRobot and scientists. Sometimes they'll be at an event, we're at an event, but it's not. There's no money involved. Axela, in terms of there's no direct connection with iRobot at all because Axela is a biotech. But that being said, we are looking to automate certain processes, and so there is a discussion around how do we create certain robotic tools that could help us in the future to automate some of the processes that we currently have to do by hand.
Interesting. So in automation for cost reasons, or automation for precision, or both, or something else? I'd say, probably both, but also just throughput. You can, if you can get a robot to do more, right? So say you have 10,000 samples that you have to process. Either you have to hire way more lab scientists, or you could just, if you could design the right type of instrument that would allow you to process them all simultaneously, then that would be wonderful. And then, of course, that assumes that Axela becomes wildly successful, which, of course, it has to, right? I mean, that's it. But it's, I think it's obviously precision-wise. We know that done properly, robotics technology is very precise as well, more so than just the same person doing the same job over and over and over again. So there's multiple reasons to do it, but it's costly, and we're still quite small, so we haven't gotten there yet. Mm-hmm. Some folks have asked questions around science and engineering practices, and you just mentioned process, and process has come up kind of indirectly in some of the things we've discussed so far. So the question, I think, is this. So science and engineering practices are the skills specific to science and engineering, and I think to say that they're specific to science and engineering is an overstatement, but for instance, the ability to argue from evidence is an example of a next generation science and engineering practice, and gathering data and be able to ask questions and identify and basically identify problems and so on. Those are examples of science and engineering practices, so skills. You talked about process, and we think about things like the engineering design process or scientific process, or if we want to be dated, we could say maybe scientific method, right? Because that's not cool anymore. I know. Do you feel like, yeah, right? Do you feel like they both have a place? Can you argue from evidence without some process? Does process have value?
It does to me. I think a lot of it has to do with how you think, and probably then by definition you will define process differently. Okay, so I'm not trying to be vague, but I think, for example, my definition of how I go about doing, setting up experiments, I have a process. So I will, and then when you think about how other people, I was doing my PhD, right, and you have other people sitting around you, and you can see what their process was for doing their own experiments or making their own decisions. Everyone has a slightly different variant that works in theory, right, for them. I'm a linear thinker, so A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. Some folks, like for example Wayne, my co-founder, he goes from Z to B to P to the number 3. That is his thought process, and he's an inventor, and it works very well for him. And he is a scientist and with engineering background as well. But I think I think you try to figure out or help children to determine what is the process that is right for them to get from A to Z. And for me, it's A, B, C, D, E, etc. For others, it may be, in a more circuitous route. But there is no one way of doing things, though there is for me, right? Again, so it's complicated. And I think part of it is now when we teach when we go into the classrooms and we teach some of these skills, some of the lessons start with a lecture. So there's the lecture, do the experiment, come back and talk about it, and then do another experiment, right, which is very traditional. But there are other lessons that we teach where you actually do the experiment first, and you see what happens, and then you go and you do the lecture, and so you're changing around the order because sometimes in life, you don't just sit down and have a lecture first. It just doesn't happen. You actually have to try it, see what happens, and then make, adapt and modify and improve. So unfortunately, it's not the clearest answer, but I think everyone, you figure out there may be several different learning styles, and you figure out how to, depending on the specific lesson, how do you teach the different methodologies, and then the kids, depending on which one works for them, they will use that, growing up, and maybe there'll be more than one, and they'll be able to understand, oh, well, in this case, I can use this methodology, or in this case, I can use, use that methodology, and they'll be armed with the toolkit to face different types of situations as they arise.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know at KnowAtom we often, in the context of science, we use a scientific process, and we actually call it the scientific method. But it would vary from, people can go to teacher stores and buy scientific method posters, get 10 of them, and all 10 will be different. And we also engage engineering design process as well when we're problem solving. But I think your point, I think your point is well taken. That having logic to be able to step forward essentially once in a kind of linear fashion to get some data, and then you become nonlinear as you kind of pivot and use what you've learned to engage in your next experiment or your next prototype or so on, and that the value of, it's almost the value of logic perhaps.
Right. I mean,
that people's logic processes change.
Right. I mean, in general, when you're teaching, right, you have to have some structure just because, again, there's limited time. And so you say, all right, what is the problem? You write it down. What is a potential solution? You try it. What happened? Did it work? Did it not work? Why not if it didn't work? Then go back, fix it, try it again, right? So that's sort of the traditional engineering design methodology. But, some people just go and build it. Like the first thing they do is just build, and then from there you can go and make alterations to the plan. So I just, if it was me answering, it would be very clear, because I know exactly how I go about solving most problems, and probably incredibly predictable in the way that I do that. But I have now seen different types of intelligences, and I've seen, been very, very successful ones who go about solving things, differently from how I do, and it still works out. So I think I've become, more understanding and more like, okay, yeah, you just do what works for you, because ultimately there is no one set solution that's going to work for every single person, right?
Well, especially too, I think when we consider complex problems, I think the easy problems have all been solved, and so as we think about more and more complex issues, right? So I think this will probably be our last question. So is it more about how you teach than what you teach?
Ooh. I mean, I think what you teach is important, but I do think how you teach is probably more so, because how you teach ends up as let me go backwards. So how you teach will determine to some extent whether or not the child remains interested, or is maybe turned off or intimidated. And that happens in the actual delivery, in the support, in the interpersonal nature of the way the content is delivered. What you teach is also, it's important, because if the content isn't interesting or whatever, there's a million things that could happen, or the kids don't relate to it or whatever. That you could have situations that don't work out either. But I actually think that if you are charismatic and encouraging, and you can be relatable and tell good stories and try to inspire the child, it's less important what you're actually doing. I mean, I've seen amazing content go completely over people's heads or be presented in such a way where nobody has cared or it's just not relevant, etc. And I've seen content that might be, not as great, but taught by someone who is truly inspiring, who gets those kids thinking about other things, making them excited, feeling confident. And you don't remember. You think about my life now, 20, 30 years later, I don't remember what the specific lesson was that I was taught back in 6th grade, what that bacterial petri dish experiment was. I don't remember what that first thing was. But I do remember that my English teacher, was so awesome and inspiring that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to read more. And that was the choice that I made. So, I mean, to say that content doesn't matter, no, of course it matters. But if the scale, the balance scale, if I had to describe it, I'd put more weight on how rather than what.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's almost, if you think about it in driving context, is it how fast you drive or where you drive, or it's a combination that maybe makes you a better driver or less accident prone or something like this. But in the case of teaching, it's really I see what you're saying. It's really both. It's how you approach the discipline, and also what you're approaching. Is it relevant and is it engaging? Because if students aren't engaged, it probably doesn't matter what you teach. So that's. Well, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. One last quick thought. We had an interesting example. I was asked to interview a student who had been in our program. There were a couple of questions. One of our corporate sponsors had asked me to find someone who'd been in your program, and I found a girl. She's now at BU. She's a sophomore, and they asked a lot of these same questions. What do you remember about your Science from Sciences class, or what was really unique about it? And it's not like she cited any specific lesson. She didn't say, oh, during the phases of the moon lesson, I really enjoyed da, 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 da. It was more about, the instructor that she had was inspirational, made her feel like she could be a scientist, that she could learn, that she had the skill sets to persevere, and now she's a genetic nutritionist. It's an interesting career choice, but she's pursuing a STEM career and she's in school and doing it. But I think I'm always interested in, after the fact, 20 years down the road, do you remember the exact content, or do you remember the person and the feeling and the support and all of the things that they did for you to make you excited and interested and inspired? And usually it's that more than just the lesson itself.
That's great, and I think we probably all have somebody in our background we can think of that would fit really in line with what you just said. So, well, thank you very much, and I want to make sure that everybody who is joining us also has a chance to take a look at Axela's site. I know it's about to launch at the time of the live session, but to check back if it's not live yet, and also to check out Science from Scientists, and to kind of, I guess, compare and contrast, or just to differentiate a bit from what KnowAtom does and Science from Scientists, that KnowAtom's focus is on really developing the classroom educator, whether it's a kindergarten teacher, first, second, so on, to be able to deliver effective STEM instruction all on their own, with the materials, the resources, professional development. What Science from Scientists offers is a scientist, somebody who has, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody who has a science degree like a master's or a PhD who can go into the classroom and actually play the role of role model and deliver content as well. So the content kind of lives with that scientist, but that's also a quite valuable mentor opportunity as well, as we were talking earlier, to be able to have especially a woman scientist perhaps join.
That is correct.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure I articulated that. So nonetheless, so please, yep, go ahead.
In France, we try to help obviously the teachers that we work with, but not in the you have all the content sort of laid out. It's different. That is the difference as well between us. But I think there's great programs that are very much very compatible with each other.
Sure, absolutely. And I think you also have after-school connections too, right, in terms of if folks are looking to, like I know some folks who may join our session might be familiar with FIRST Robotics and will engage that as an after-school opportunity for students. Science from Scientists has after-school opportunities as well, is that correct?
We have some, usually through, like for example, the Boston Public Libraries, or through the Boys and Girls Clubs, or through local Ys. We do that as well. We have, we also have certain outreach programs like science camps, or we don't call them camps, we call them vacation programs, but they're during vacation time, sort of week-long programs that we offer, as well as science theater shows where we light things on fire and blow things up and try to get kids up on the stage doing interactive science. But I'd say predominantly our main programming is the in-school, every other week piece where we work with the kids and classroom teachers to bring neat science into the classroom.
That's great. So definitely check out these two sites, and I want to thank you, Erika, for your time and your willingness to join us, share your experience, answer all these questions. I know I've learned a lot, and it's, there's no better source than a scientist, an engineer, and entrepreneur herself.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And if you're interested to Bye-bye. If you're interested to learn any more about KnowAtom or stay connected for more interviews and other online events like this, you can stay connected through our blog, which is knowatom.com/blog, facebook.com/KnowAtom, or you can follow us on Twitter @KnowAtom. There are additional interviews as well as other online resources which are free and readily available at knowatom.com/resources, or you can just go to our site, knowatom.com, and check out the resources section at the top of the page. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Francis Vigent, and that concludes our interview with Dr. Erika Ebbel Angle. Have a great day.